Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze is a game in which you play as a clan of simple apes seizing control of a series of islands with no regard for the damages they do to the native culture, wildlife or ecosystems. So imagine my surprise when I discovered that this game is in fact not set in the United States of America, but actually in a fictional location. Now, granted, this initial assessment may not be entirely fair. The plot centres around Donkey Kong and his crew having their home island frozen and stolen away from them by the villainous Snowmads, led by a villain who isn't King K. Rool, because back in 2014, Nintendo didn't know who that was. So if DK and friends are just trying to reclaim their home island, what led to this video's scathing opening? Well, I'll be honest, I don't like Donkey Kong. He bothers me. His head makes me uncomfortable for starters. I can't tell if that's supposed to be a quiff or some kind of ambiguously appetizing swirl. And his case certainly isn't helped by the way his fur was textured throughout so much of the GameCube and Wii era. Donkey Kong in the 2000s may have been able to scrap with many dangerous, nefarious villains, but he also looked like he could have been assassinated by any drooling child with a big enough spoon. In Mario Kart Double Dash, Donkey Kong's posterior is far too finely detailed. He has what looks like a real, delicately sculpted human arse. Do you think this was some kind of Machiavellian plot to ensure his victory? Do you think he did 100 squats a day, 7 days a week, every week leading up to these races, knowing that he'd distract the drivers behind him? It worked on me, but I was a child back then. So the police will be in touch, Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong unsettles me in just about every way imaginable. His design and lore is so uncanny, even compared to the cast of murderous nutcases he's often accompanying. He's just a big monkey, and monkeys are fucking terrifying. They're like a dark mirror into our primal past. So close to being like us, but just not quite. The average human likes to think that their evil doppelganger would be some kind of sinister, more edgy version of themselves, but it wouldn't. It would be an uncanny, shit-flinging ape. This is the biggest reason I didn't play any of the Donkey Kong Country games growing up. Well, that and the fact that I didn't own an SNES. Actually, that was probably the bigger one. But 2D platformers are my favourite video game genre, and a couple years after I bought a Switch and the port was released, the rumblings of Tropical Freeze's quality began pounding on my ears like distant drums, the same way they had when the game originally released on the Wii U in 2014. So, get it! This seems like a no-brainer, right? Buy the game and see what everyone's raving about. No! Because one of the key selling points of Tropical Freeze is the unfortunate appearance of his hairy, knuckle-dragging family, none of whom make me any less uncomfortable. Cranky Kong is an old man, meaning he almost definitely voted for the people who displaced Donkey Kong from his ancestral home. I imagine he's been to a lot of rallies, none of them about racing, all of them about races. Dixie Kong looks like she had a hair transplant from a European football player. Her entire design brings to mind cosmetics testing on animals, the same way all of everyone's least favourite Animal Crossing villagers do. And then there's Diddy Kong, whose only discernible personality trait appears to be that he wears a hat. This makes him the least offensive, but he is also a child, and I hate that. I'd love to be able to spend my whole Tropical Freeze playthrough playing as Funky Kong. But unfortunately, because of the way he's designed, that would make me a stupid baby gamer, and I am only two of those things. So in case the title hasn't made it clear enough, I hope these opening minutes, and the fact that it's taken me this long to get to any kind of intro, has reinforced to you that you are watching the world's worst review of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, where there's a 0% chance of hearing that something is good, there's a 0% chance of hearing that something is bad, and there's a 90% chance of hearing a joke about inflation porn. Sorry in advance. So, what is the world's worst review, you may be asking? Well, much like the apes evolved into humans, the world's worst review is the next logical step for the D-View, a series I was working on for about 8 months prior to the conceptualization of this new series. It's a review series in which there will be no rating given at the end and no straightforward value judgments. At no point during these videos am I allowed to refer to anything as good, bad, or any of either word's countless synonyms. In the D-View, I was still allowed to use these words as long as they weren't in the context of talking about the game at hand's supposed quality, but with this series, I've tightened the screws. These words are strictly outlawed in any context. It may seem like a harsh restriction, but have some faith in me, okay? I'm pretty good at this. Perhaps the better question is, why is the world's worst review? Why are you even doing this in the first place? Well, for a few reasons. One, because the enemy of art is the absence of limitations. Such arbitrary restrictions force me to get creative, even poetic, with the way I discuss a game's qualities. It also forces you, the viewer, to listen carefully to what I'm saying, rather than skip to the end for a big shiny number that will tell you exactly how you should feel about this game you've never played. Two, because there are literal hundreds of YouTube channels out there already doing far more conventional video game essays and reviews. And hey, more power to them. I hope they are hashtag securing their hashtag bags. But I am a pathological hipster, and if I don't feel like I'm doing something different at all times, I'll explode like the bus from Speed. And three, because it's funny. Have you heard some of the shit I've been saying so far? Jeez. Let's be real here though, Donkey Kong's ass is a bit too spankable, isn't it? Whether you're watching this video for the first, second or fifth time, or you're playing through Tropical Freeze specifically because of this video, I hope you're ready to be challenged. Nothing in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze floats. This is one of many factors that distinguishes it from its contemporaries. Let's take for example, whichever 2D Mario game came out closest to this one. Ah, there you are. 2012's New Super Mario Bros. U for the Wii U. 2012, eh? Not so new now, are you? You smug prick. Go to practically any level in Super Mario Bros. U and you'll see the same thing. Platforms and pieces of the environment floating in open air with no rhyme or reason behind it. You and the developers know what you're here for, so what's the point in pretending that there's any logic behind the way these platforms behave? But Tropical Freeze's environmental designers and art directors go the extra mile. Every platform and surface makes logical sense in this game. Some of the ways they're framed, like being held up by balloons or being pieces of chopped flying fruit, are obviously very cartoonish, in fact expectedly so, but more endearing than anything is the way that there is always an attempt to make these things make sense. For all this, Tropical Freeze is weirdly grounded. It has a sense of cartoonish realism, oxymoronic as that may sound. Tropical Freeze is also well known for the moments that take place in its levels. There are so many sudden bursts of creativity, so many breaks from any established norm that spontaneously combust onto the screen in otherwise seemingly innocuous levels. Only the second minecart level in the game throws this insane scenario at you towards the end where you're being chased by a giant buzzsaw which, as a direct result of it soaring through the wood behind you, is actually creating the platforms you'll use to escape, going back to what I just said about how there's always a sense of cartoonish logic behind these things. The one after that, oh, there's lanes now. There's just a whole lanes mechanic that stretches the level out into 3D. There's a whole series of levels that are basically Flappy Bird, but they get completely nuts. One of them has this penguin in a giant mech that chases you throughout the level trying to kill you with all these attacks that travel between the foreground and background at a slanted angle, practically bending the dimensions of 2D and 3D. The developers over at Retro Studios could have put significantly less effort into designing an app that was just these levels with way less creativity and technical effort involved, and made millions more in doing so. Truly, creative integrity is fucking pointless, and we should all just upload our reactions to reality TV shows for the rest of our lives. With all these set pieces firing off all over the place, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze eventually starts to resemble a series of Michael Bay movies that are made about monkeys instead of for them. Compare this to 2D Mario and... hang on, wait a minute. I've just got to let it come to me. Yeah, 2D Mario doesn't have any of this shit. What it does have is a lot more repeating backgrounds, art assets and music, and a whole lot more... well, I've forgotten what it is now. But it has a lot more... something, I don't know. There's something about Tropical Freeze having a consistent setting with so much detail and environmental logic in its backgrounds and levels that's just so appealing to me. I don't know if this is controversial at all, but my favourite game in the original Crash trilogy is Crash 1. And I think this is largely because it's set on a series of islands, and throughout the game you get to see that setting be fleshed out. It's grounded. There's a real sense of place and theme that I think is missing from its sequels, where you're zipping around to different time periods and places all the time. Tropical Freeze is one of few games that I think is willing to emulate that consistency in setting. It still does a lot to make each island feel different to the last, but in a sensible way, and it doesn't have to go to space or ancient Rome to have an inspired setting. A series of tropical islands may sound less appealing on paper, but there's so much effort, so much artfulness and passion put into everything about these islands that makes them infinitely more interesting to traverse, in my opinion. Those who have played Crash 1 and Tropical Freeze will be aware of an even more striking commonality, however, and that's the fact that they are both hard as balls. Being the fifth iteration of a series famed for its steep difficulty curve, Tropical Freeze initially welcomes you back like a friend you haven't seen in years sitting down at a table in a pub. For the first few worlds it's all, yeah, coming in, take a load off, how have you been? And then you get into the mid-game and the conversation gets a little more grim. You lost your job? Ah, that sucks. And I'm sorry your relationship didn't work out. And then it happens. By the way, World 6, I fucked your dad. And I'm a landlord now. David Benioff and D.B. Weiss are my new best friends, and the ending to Game of Thrones was my idea. It's not just levels in Tropical Freeze that will give you a thorough spanking, but the bosses too. There are no checkpoints at all in any of them, and some of them, such as this definitely racist polar bear, go on for very long. Perhaps the only boss more infamous is this Fudj fish, who grows so huge in its attempt to kill you that it's honestly comical. First time I ever made it this far, I remember simultaneously screaming and laughing to myself alone in my university dorm, and I assume my flatmates thought I was some kind of actual crazy person, and I assumed they were correct. This inflating Fudj fish is so legendarily hard that discourse around it on the internet is still shockingly common today. Seriously, just look up Donkey Kong inflation online. I hear they talk about it a lot on DeviantArt. Here's a link. While you're doing that, let me go ahead and regale you with the word of the day. Word, as in like W.W.R. for World's Worst Review. Word of the day. Word. The word of the day is spangle. Spangle as a verb, meaning to cover with small objects, often bright and colourful. Spangle as a noun, meaning a small piece of bright decorative material, like a sequin. In a loose sense, you could suggest that Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze's levels are in fact very much spangled, especially the backgrounds. Check out levels like this, where an enemy jumping on a jelly blob in the background affects what's going on in the foreground, or where enemies in the background throw projectiles into the foreground that you have to use to progress. The game is covered in colourful little details like this, positively spangled. Begrudgingly, let's get back to Donkey Kong and his ugly family, because their existence illuminates a lot of the game's level design. Each of them grant Donkey Kong extra hit points and come with their own unique ability, and every single level in the game elegantly accounts for Donkey Kong flying solo or having any of these companions alongside him. They're all fully completable no matter what the circumstances. Some levels are obviously made dramatically easier by their presence, but there is not a single challenge in the game that Donkey Kong can't overcome by his boorish, simple, primitive feral monkey self. Here's the thing, not all of these companions are made equal, beastly, hideous, savage and hairy as they may be. Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong have both been the protagonists of their own Donkey Kong Country games in the past, yet there is quite literally no reason to ever use Diddy Kong as long as Dixie Kong is also an option, because Dixie Kong in Tropical Freeze breaks the game like it's the camel's back and she is made out of straws. Diddy Kong allows you to hover, readjusting your jump arc in midair and delaying your landing. Dixie Kong does exactly that, only for a slightly slightly shorter time before propelling you upwards with her hair, giving you both a mini hover on startup that you can cancel at any time, and a huge vertical boost, which gives you more falling time and thus more time to react to your landing and readjust your jump arc. The distance she travels overall is close to, if not longer than Diddy Kong's, and she gives you extra height in the process. Picking Cranky Kong is often as much of a death sentence as being Cranky Kong, but he at least has a niche use in levels with lots of spikes and dangerous solid obstacles, as he can pogo off them with his cane, and might just be more helpful than Dixie in those situations. Big emphasis on might. Between Dixie's obvious superiority over Diddy and Old Man Cranky consistently pulling off the most athletic feats of the three, Tropical Freeze has a real case of what we in the game sphere like to call ludonarrative dissonance. Ludonarrative dissonance is basically when something in the gameplay doesn't match up with the game's story or lore. Think Tony Hawk not actually being a hawk. I'll be sure to bring up more cases of ludonarrative dissonance to you when they show themselves, because God knows this game, and just about every other one ever made, is practically bursting at the seams with them. Without any of his clambering compatriots at his side, Donkey Kong feels weighty. He's a strange protagonist for a 2D platformer when you really think about it, so much of his identity coming from the fact that he's a lumbering ape, far less nimble and agile in concept than his contemporary platformer protagonists. But this kind of shows in the game. He has no double jump to speak of, he doesn't run that fast, he has no style, he has no grace. He has something, I can't think of it right now. But his ordinary jump is pretty small, and he doesn't have much air acceleration without a roll preceding it either. That roll is the core part of his kit. It's what gives the game so much of its feel. So many of the game's most satisfying moments begin with a roll, often more specifically with a roll jump, which can allow you to string together platforming sequences that will finish a fraction of a whole level in a matter of seconds if you're acclimated enough with the layout. And while Donkey Kong can jump out of almost any single frame of his roll, he can't initiate a roll whilst in his turnaround animation. This leads to a lot of moments where you'll go to turn around to face a new obstacle, go to initiate a roll to begin traversing it, and just walk off a ledge and die whilst wildly mashing the roll button. This is one of only 2 moments where I would say the game feels unresponsive, though that's 2 more than I'd say games like Celeste or Rayman Legends have. As buttery as it may be for the most part, and as satisfying as it feels to blast through whole sections of level thanks to the way they've been so meticulously crafted for skilled players to do such a thing, these minor hiccups occasionally get in the way and bring things to an abrupt halt where maybe they don't need to. It would be fair to say that Tropical Freeze's movement is a slippery slope. That's what we in the writing world call a double entendre. Something strange about these aforementioned levels is that there's no real requirement for unlocking them. It's just a matter of making it to the end, smashing the barrel and progressing on to the next one. The bananas, the game's main collectible, are only really there to give you extra lives when you collect 100 of them and fill up a meter that lets you use a special attack which turns nearby enemies into red balloons, which give you extra lives. This is helpful and all, but it's odd that you're playing as Donkey Kong, who supposedly loves bananas so much that he got one for his birthday, and yet they're not necessary throughout the game even once. You, as Donkey Kong, could hypothetically finish any level in the game whilst never even so much as touching a single one of the level's countless bananas. I'm sure I know what you're thinking. Could it be? Well, yes it is! Well done! This is ludonarrative dissonance. If the lack of entry requirements for Tropical Freeze's levels are weird, however, their names are downright insulting. So obsessed with proving that it knows what alliteration and rhyming are, Donkey Kong Country always has completely discarded the notion that their level names need to make any sense whatsoever. Tell me, what the hell does panicky paddles mean? Obviously, these paddles are a central part of the level, but are they feeling panicked? No, they're inanimate objects, they can't feel emotions. So are they inducing the panic? Because the level's vibe is actually pretty chill by comparison, and if you wanted to convey that they were doing so whilst maintaining your obsession with alliteration, you could just call it Paddle Panic. There, I fixed it for you. Don't even get me started on shit like Amiss Abyss. I'll burst a fucking blood vessel. The only credit I can give to Donkey Kong Country's level naming conventions are that it's not crashes, which are so hell-bent on using puns and slang that one of the GBA games has a level called Snow Job. Let's move on before I put my head through a table. A lot of videos about video games that aren't the more traditional essays and reviews nowadays kind of function like a recap. You know, it's like, here's a video game, here's everything that happens in it, here's everything you can do in it, interspersed with my opinion on it. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's a totally valid way to make content, and they're often a big undertaking with a lot of work involved. And for people who don't feel like they have the time to play the video games they want, these videos can be helpful for getting people up to speed on what happens in them and what they're like. Thing is, whether they mean to or not, and they often don't, they can lead to people, even subconsciously, forming opinions on things they've never even experienced firsthand. And this is what I want to avoid. I don't want to touch on everything. I don't want you to come away feeling like you know everything about the game or that you can accurately form an opinion on it. I want you to still have questions. I want you to feel like you could still see or experience things you're not expecting if, for better or for worse, my video makes you want to try the game at hand. In this video in particular, it's hard to leave a lot up to the imagination because it's on a 2D platformer, and if I don't talk about at least like 75% of its elements, then it'll be hard to reach that minimum 20-minute length that I'm holding myself to, even with my inhuman rambling abilities. So it's gone a bit like a checklist so far. I haven't talked about everything. There's secret exits in a lot of the levels in this game that unlock other, more secret levels in every island, and I'm only going to show you footage of one of those exits right now because they're supposed to be secret. Even with all this being said, there is one last thing worth talking about that I would never dare leave out under any circumstances. I imagine anyone who's already played the game might know what that is. It's the music. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze's soundtrack is about as acclaimed as the soundtracks of the previous Donkey Kong Country games, which is to say, it's acclaimed. It remixes so many of the classics of those predecessors, but it also strikes out on its own. The original DKC trilogy, despite being harmless kids games, has music that's often oddly mature. Contemplative, melancholy or daunting when it wants to be, but always surprisingly complex. Tropical Freeze's overall tone is a bit different. It's still able to get reflective and somber, especially in the final world, with tracks like Seashore War and Forest Folly evoking more emotion than you'd ever likely expect to feel in a game about monkeys collecting bananas. But more than anything, I feel like it has a stronger overall sense of joy and pure happiness. Maybe I'm reading into the music too much, but most of the tracks in the first few worlds give me the impression that the developers just had tons of fun making this game. They're so jubilant, so upbeat and uplifting that feeling of pure unbridled fun is stamped onto the game early on and never fully washed off, even as oppressive as the atmosphere can be in the game's later stages. Tracks like Canopy Chaos and Trunk Twister have since managed to make me nostalgic about a game I played for the first time in 2018 as a jaded young adult in a lonely and isolated university dorm, from a series that I'd never played prior. They have this Disney-like quality that I can't describe, this fairy dust intangible that I think just makes them special. The lead composer is Jungle Jazz Jesus David Wise, a man whose work I've praised numerous times now, and while jazz seems to be his forte, Tropical Freeze doesn't rest on the laurels of funky brass. It branches out to swing and even hard rock and metal for some of the game's more surprising boss themes. I could sit here and try and quantify the quality of Tropical Freeze's soundtrack all day, but I have very little knowledge of music theory, and so I think I could sum it all up far more succinctly and far more fudgishly with the second installment of a segment that debuted in the final edition of the D-View on Snake Pass. David Wise's music makes me... David Wise's music makes me want to join a travelling band of didgeridoo players and roam the harsh savannah, sitting by the campfire at night and telling weary travellers tales of the times we fought off bears with makeshift wooden toothbrushes. David Wise's music makes me want to chain an anvil to my ankle and jump into the ocean. But, like, not drown? If I could not drown, that'd be ideal, because I want to, like, you know, become one with the ocean and the deep sea creatures and watch all the reefs and marine life pass me by. Or maybe I don't. The deep sea scares the fuck out of me, actually. What am I saying? David Wise's music makes me want to meditate under a waterfall for 8 hours, letting the crashing water awaken my true self, achieving inner enlightenment in the process, and just living with the fact that doing this for as long as I have has moulded my head into the shape of a coffee table. I can deal with that, because now I'm like super smart. I think about the pursuit of art a lot. I know some people might think me pretentious for that, but 1, I make more than enough fart and penis jokes to even that out, and 2, if we stopped using pretentious as a lazy blanket insult like we have been doing for years, 80% of the games shown at E3 every year might not look like the exact same fucking thing. And actually interesting stuff with different ideas might succeed on YouTube. I think about it because certain types of media are always subject to be held up as more inspired and influential pieces of art than others. Think of Oscar bait movies and how there's a certain type of movie you can always bet will have a chance of winning Best Picture and a certain type which won't. I think we're starting to see a similar trend with the Game of the Year award at the Game Awards and countless other accolades in the games industry. I talked about this a bit towards the end of my 10k subscriber special video on Breath of the Wild. Some games, like The Last of Us or Breath of the Wild, are just more likely to be seen as art and to be held up in high regard than simpler, more low concept games like Animal Crossing or Donkey Kong. And we need to shatter that art vision we have. Everything is valid as art. How successful it is comes down to how it makes you feel. It's that simple. Did this thing make you feel something? And was it trying to make you feel that way? If so, then it achieved what it set out to do. That's a successful piece of art right there. To what extent it made you feel these things, and if it made you feel anything else that you weren't expecting, are further variables that would be extraneous to talk about now. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze is a game about monkeys and bananas, but it's explorative in every way. Every element of it comes together to make you feel like you're on a journey, and one far more emotional than you ever would have expected. And nothing ever really happens in the game or in the story to suggest that. It's just how it makes you feel. This is why 2D platformers are my favourite genre. It's that simplicity. The game design and intention is laid bare right in front of you. It's so easy to look at it and see what a developer was trying to do. And it's equally fascinating to see how far a developer can stretch such basic mechanics and try and make something different and ambitious out of it. There's a shocking amount of directions you can take the simple act of jumping between platforms on a 2D plane. When you're trying to analyse some kind of big-ass RPG, you can get lost in all the moving parts. The gameplay and story and how they intertwine, and the litany of other mechanics that are sure to be present. You're not just analysing a game, you're analysing a story. And as a writing graduate, let me tell you that analysing games is much easier than analysing stories. 2D platformers, by contrast, are the embodiment of this limitations breed creativity mantra. Look at how stagnant RPGs have been for the past 20 or so years by comparison. About 80% of them only willing to dabble in sci-fi or fantasy settings, and that's because they have a lot more still to figure out before they can start thinking about breaking the mould. 2D platformers have been everywhere and everyone, because the simplicity and the limitations do away with that crippling, overwhelming influx of choice and decision. They are the gamiest games out there. Tropical Freeze is so gamey. It's so bursting with that game juice that immediately gives you a taste of what the game is trying to do at every step, what it's trying to achieve with every jump, every particularly placed enemy, every collectible. It has no excess because it doesn't have to support a whole bunch of complicated systems that allow the player to be whoever they want to be. You're a monkey. Jump! It sits nestled amongst a handful of games that made me nostalgic for them just about a month after I'd finished them for the first time. Retro Studios made a glowing, smiling artwork out of monkeys and bananas. And as someone who yearns desperately to make something special themselves, but at the moment only feels they have their voice, their writing and footage of video games that other people have made at their disposal, that's actually pretty inspiring to me. This may have been the world's worst review of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. You may have found that you didn't think it was the worst at all. Whatever the case may be, as ever, I just hope it was something. Thank you as always to my prolific high-tier patrons: Cheesy Chip, Mike Archer, Mike Craig, Captain L, Good Chicken, Chris Monk, Flashing Fire, Tale of the Toaster, Waldington, Justin Mills, Heist Van Buren, Super, Isaac Vermeer, Charnucky, The Ghost of Karl Marx in 4D, Isaac, GP, Swagboy, Dixie Enormous, Kavan Green, Elliot Joyce, Raven, Lucas. Oh man. I'm gonna assume Fuchs or Fuchs or I'm sorry, Lucas. We both know what the issue is here, right? Lucas, thank you, Lucas. Thanks. Salad Dinner, The Great Fantas, Fuad Lahoud, and Binbag Fan 69. That was the first edition of the World's Worst Review, basically just the D review, but kind of souped up and with a few tweaks made to make it a bit more, viable, I guess is the word. As I hope you can probably tell, it was a tremendous amount of work. Probably going to cap out at like 12k views or whatever, but hey, I enjoy it, I'm going to keep trying to make this thing work. Yep, that's it. If you would consider giving to the Patreon, that'd be absolutely huge, obviously. Shouts to my beautiful friends over at Patchwork, and I hope you're looking forward to the next one. See you soon.